we'll let you get going.
Okay,
And sorry, I gotta make you co-host. Okay, you should be able to share your slides.
there it is. Okay. I guess start off looking at it. Basically, going to cover two pieces that was in the last report: currency devaluation and the global impact, and wage trends and performance management. But the title up top is, creating a context in which other people can think. And it kind of goes with something you said before, John, is I like to look at everything and then kind of make my own mind up. And what it is some of the things I say, you may look and say your own company, yeah, we watch that very closely. This is nothing new. Others may say, gee, I haven't thought about that for a while. And others say it has no impact. But basically, it makes you think about it. You can walk away or you can go, maybe I should look a little further. So that's basically what I'm trying to do with both the report and with the webinar. And in the reports is always start off with a kind of an economic summary. And what I'm just trying to do is throw out a bit of bits and pieces. And consumer price index always seems to get the headlines, though I don't think a lot of people understand exactly what's contained in there. And the reporting is on the high level. So thought I had some dates. So the CPI in the top level went from 1.9 to almost 2.4. But the big move was fresh fruit and sugar, which if you look at it and say September, that's not that surprising. And I think the rest of the details go the same. I started out when I was putting together the slides, and it was from the last report, retail sales in Canada fell 0.8 to 69.6. But then this week it popped up with the August retail sales, and they increased 1% to 70.4 billion. And you kind of have to take all these things in context. You look at, if you sit and look at September's CPI 2.4 and look, UK is 4.1 and the US is 3.1, but they're all on the high level. Maybe in a future, well, I don't know if anybody would be interested. It's kind of comparing on a lower level how it compares to other countries. But when looking at retail, it's hovering. Okay, it's hovering around the 68 to 70.1, and it's not moving a lot. Even with the different seasons and so forth, it's still sitting in a very tight range. Bank of Canada lowered its rate to 2.25, but we have to remember the bank's minimum prime rate is around the 4.45, and many of the banks have two or three prime rates, one for mortgages, one for different types of lending. And if you want to look at credit cards, good luck. I was in that business for a few months, and really, they're all over the place, somewhere between 4.5% and 25%. So just be cautious. But like consumer price, unemployment also seems to be the same. In August, Canadian unemployment fell by 66,000. Wow. Unemployment rose to 70.1. But then employment increased by 60,000 in September, down 66, up 60, and the unemployment rate was unchanged. Um, Hard to see any direction uh, from these big numbers.
Hey,
Uh,
Bob, do you have any data on credit card debt or Canadian debt overall and by how much it's increasing?
um, Not other than the feel, which you probably have, is yeah, it's increasing. Um, Not too sure if that's trying to get back. I'd like to get down to more details as to why. People are buying cars, 45, $50,000 cars on credit cards, uh, which is a little scary. But a lot of price, is it due to price increases? Is it due to volume? Is it due to lower incomes, cost of living? Hard to tell.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's going up. Looking from the devaluation and interest rates, just wanted to look at, like, there's five components looking at it, which is there are 180 currencies, recognized currencies, out there in the world. And the Canadian dollar, US dollar, and the euro are only three of those. But the big kicker is, of course, most contracts, uh, over 50%, I think it was 57%, are denominated in US dollars, uh, which is really the big trade piece, because the remainder is the euro, with countries within Europe trading with each other, as well as neighbors in other countries use the local currency rather than US dollars. And if you look how wild it gets, is of course all of those 180 currencies appreciate and depreciate from time to time, as does the Canadian dollar. But the US dollar is also moving. And that's why originally, with the data I was putting out, I had numerous currencies in there, but it was just, if all the currencies are moving, then it's usually the US dollar that is moving. So it's just kind of here is giving some of the context in there. Now, looking at new trading partners and countries, trading in US dollars with American counterparts is relatively straightforward. And that's probably why Canada has done it to such an extent. And it's cheaper because of transportation. The dollar's global dominance means fewer surprises. Pricing is stable, liquidity is deep, and regulations are familiar. And I'll look at that. Regulations are familiar. But once you step outside the comfort zone, things get interesting, sometimes profitable and sometimes very treacherous. When I was working in Korea, I was asked to review a contract, and it was a very large contract for multi years. And when I went through it, they had a price adjustment based on the Korean CPI. And I asked those people, the negotiators who had come to town, whether they understood the Korean CPI. And they go, no, we know what CPI is, even though most of them were engineers. And I said, well, the Korean CPI, 60% of it is based on the price of rice. And the price of rice is controlled, it's heavily subsidized, and making meaningful escalation, unlikely over the contract of 10-year span. These guys were bringing in hundreds of senior people and engineers and so forth. They're going to expect increases because a lot of them, their family stayed in Canada. So I recommended to them that they certainly don't use the Korean CPI, because this would have caused huge problems. And while working in Asia, this was a common piece that many, when I was working in Singapore, the Canadian account managers would recommend they stop off in Singapore and sit down with some of us in Asia and go over what they were trying to do. Doing business in Indonesia or the Philippines, at that time, even certainly Korea and the rest, has very interesting twists. And if you're not aware of them, it can be devastating to a contract that seemed to look great on the surface. Now, one of the things I highlight in the report and called it the half price sale in Argentina. And this isn't exploitation, it's economic action. When a country's currency depreciates, it's not a sign of defeat, it's a lever for recovery. Argentina's dramatic peso depreciation has made its goods and services astonishingly affordable to foreign buyers. But this isn't taking advantage of a nation in crisis. It's the natural outcome of a time-tested economic mechanism. As you probably all know, currency depreciation stimulates growth. It makes exports cheaper on the global market, boosts tourism, and encourages domestic production by making imports more expensive. And Argentina is leveraging this dynamic, not surrendering to it. I did a couple of calculations, and then if you took a contract which had a US dollar $10 per unit cost, in January 2024, that would have translated to $13.40 Canadian, and 8,168 pesos. But by August 2025, the Canadian dollar costs had gone up a few cents to 13.78, but the peso is up to 12,653. So the producer in Argentina is now getting 12,653, which previously was in the $8,000 mark. A huge difference. Now, they've also encountered inflation of over 100% for, I guess, a year and a half, 2 years. But everything is kicking in because the interest rates are closely tied to the currency devaluation or appreciation. Generally, lower interest rates can lead to currency depreciation, while higher interest rates tend to support currency strength. And that goes both ways, of course. If lower interest rates, if companies are going to invest in a country, lower interest rates will also lower their cost. But it also inhibits capital movement. Capital moves to where the higher interest rates are. Of course, inflation, imports become more expensive, so people buy locally. But on the import-export, one of the cautionary things is elasticity in supply chains. We know it boosts export and reduces imports, but is there a global market, okay, for more product? And that question then hits other areas. All right. And can the supply chain support it? Meaning, is the supply chain there and in place? But when you look at these numbers where the Canadian dollar moved up and the pesos moved up dramatically, it also means the US dollar is moving. We often, as in the previous slide, don't think about the movement of the US dollar. We think of it as a constant. The other side is the Eurozone. When Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Greece faced economic stagnation, they couldn't devalue their currency to regain competitiveness. The euro is tethered to stronger currencies like Germany and remained firm. It even appreciated earlier this year against the US dollar. So these Southern European nations are left with few tools to stimulate growth. They're forced instead into painful austerity and internal devaluation. An internal devaluation means wage cuts, cutting government spending, or increasing taxes, uh, which is painful and politically very difficult. Currently, what we have, let's say in France, is French wines. Grapes had a bumper crop, but they're hitting up against the U.S. largest importer with tariffs of 15 to 20%. They can't devalue their currency because they're tied to the euro. The government's up to its eyeballs in debt, and they can't seem to pass an austerity budget. So they're in a very tight place. It's maybe a good time to buy French wine. But what about if French wine becomes cheaper in the global market? How about Italian or even Australian wines? Do they also have to lower their prices to compete against the French wines? So that is kind of where I'm pushing, that there is a global impact to these countries, from these countries who are having economic problems. What happened in Argentina was farmers delayed exports knowing there was a devaluation coming along, so they stopped importing. But the result was global grain prices rose, affecting food costs in China, Egypt, and the EU because Argentina wasn't shipping. Argentina hiked fuel prices because they buy oil in US dollars. But what it also turned out to happen was that the refineries were in Argentina. So this hit the energy prices in both Chile and Uruguay because they relied on gasoline from Argentina. Multinationals started renegotiating peso denominated contracts, and multinationals having their foot in multiple of countries, buying to one, selling to another, and so forth, they had the power to start pushing down on existing contracts. And that hit agricultural business, automotive, and lithium. Lithium being a key component of batteries. Argentine peso's instability then delayed lithium projects. They had projects set up, but with the instability in the country, those were put on hold. And being a big component of batteries, that hit Asia as well as North America. So none of this these days are isolated. They will hit the global markets. So if you're an importer, what does that do to your business? Well, there are opportunities. If you don't know the country, I put out the warning in the first part. Get to know. Every country is different in how it works. Exporters and troubled economies will be willing to lower they're US dollar prices because they earn more per US dollar. So even if you're hesitant, and you should be to some degree, in doing contracts in a local currency, you can look at lowering US dollar prices. But one of the big things, and what I had on the previous piece, is that goods become cheaper globally, which puts pressure on suppliers in other countries. You may be buying the product or commodity from another country, but Argentina start lowering their price will put pressure on your current suppliers. There may be a very good place to start negotiating, because the world price, global price, is starting to devalue. And everybody is trying to secure long-term contracts and protect their share. So it may be an excellent opportunity to diversify sourcing, because there may be new players there. They may be more competitively priced than they were when you looked at them in the last time. They are having problems, of course, with the US tariffs. So companies are looking for new opportunities and new partners. And there is a place to renegotiate contracts. Even if you have a solid contract, there may be an opening here to renegotiate it. And I guess the big thing is every country has trade problems, whether they're tariffs, foreign exchange, and usually the foreign exchange is indicative of other problems, economic problems and political. So some of the things, and also looking at going forward, is calling clause engineering. Build an FX buffer, which means this contract is valid up to here, but should be negotiated if the exchange rate moves 5 or 10% in either direction. Dual indexing, or even currency ranges to protect against wild swings, which is put that in the contract. It may be just open to having some way of sitting down, renegotiating, depending on what happens, even in the short term. Payment structuring. Companies may now be open to payment schedules instead of a big chunk on delivery or shipping date or invoice date, so that payments can be scheduled over time. Sales milestones. There may be all sorts of flexibility out there into, as sales progress. Let's here in Canada, is that would trigger different payments or partial prepayment and in currency options. I worked when I was in Singapore. We had some very large loans, and most of them had currency options, which meant the lender could switch currencies at specific times as the amounts were rolled over in interest rates. So they could change currencies and hit on different interest rates as that happened. And that was a huge thing. There were sometimes 20 different banks from different countries who were participating in this loan, and they all had currency options. And the big one is local insight, understanding how a country currency and really their markets behave. I don't know how many times I got calls in Singapore and they asked, well, why are you doing that? And after a while, I got to the point, well, why do you do this in Canada? Okay, there are different options, different mechanics and so forth. People seem to think everything has to be the same as their home country. It's not. The world is very different, and they have attacked problems and historically in different ways. I love HR. HR used to call me, why are you doing this in HR? And I go, well, why do you do this in Canada? Uh, it's different. Okay. So I just listed down a few of them. Fixed exchange rate clause, it's possible. Market rates at payment date, invoice date rate clauses applies the rate published on the invoice date. Monthly average rate, using the average exchange rate for for relevant billing months. There are some mechanics in there that you have to pull out, but you would be basically buying US dollars throughout the month, but what you're paying, you're looking at coming out with is an average rate. Fluctuating threshold clause, and this is probably the biggest one, is there is a clause that would trigger renegotiation if FX changes exceed a certain percentage. And base currency clause, establish single currency for all pricing and payments, which may not be the US dollar or may be just related or a percentage to that. And having a dispute mediation. If you haven't done any of these before, it may be just interesting to discuss it with your counterpart. And from there, just having a clause to trigger a renegotiation. So anyway, in there is, and really the point I'm trying to make in all this FX and devaluation and so forth, is countries face export challenge or economic stagnation and may devalue their currency. You don't need to engage directly with these economies to feel the impact. Their lower price can reset global benchmarks. And that's the key thing I look at is keeping your eye on. And buyers begin comparing these prices in US dollar, pressuring suppliers in stronger economies to either justify their higher price or offer concessions to stay in the game. Things are changing like never before, and it's just FX is just often the result of all these tariffs that are changes going on. I was going to look at and say something completely different, but I'll make a comment. It may not be that different. Labor and wage report. Many firms tout their CPI-linked salary adjustments as a mark of responsibility. But while aligning pay with the cost of living may sound prudent, it often obscures a more fundamental truth. Wages, like all other costs, are ultimately shaped by supply and demand. Labor markets don't follow inflation charts. They respond to talent scarcity, economic shifts, and competitive pressures. This may seem cold-hearted and calculating, but it's true. And I once in a group, not specifically because of these numbers, but I had taken over a group of about 200 in Montreal and basically told them, we are charging less than it costs to make this product. And if we don't change and do it faster, we're all out of a job. Again, you're not taking advantage, you're responding, you're competing. And that's good for the majority of employees. let's look at a few of the numbers. When you look at the top chart, okay, there's really no surprise. Truck drivers make more than warehouse workers, and warehouse workers make more than retail staff. It's kind of the way it's been for quite a while. But if you look at the lower chart, comparing increases against CPI, you come up with different stories. Where you see in 2021 compared to 2020, hourly rates for warehouse workers went down. Now, back in 2020, we were just coming out of COVID and people were scrambling and they were increasing salaries and offers almost on a daily basis. I remember one HR individual said that he had a meeting with an individual at 10 o'clock. And as he was making his way to the meeting, he saw a sign outside an Amazon, which offered a higher salary. And he went into Amazon or Walmart and took the job. Things were moving fast, but in 2021, things started to settle down. Now, today, actually, our 2025 so far, and that's in August, is salaries again for warehouse workers are lower. So it kind of begs the question of where should you be paying? Sometimes you just need bodies and hands to move product, but I think it's more complicated than that. Even when you look at management, okay, it responded a bit better to the previous year's CPI. As you can see in 2022, CPI was up at 6.8, and the next year on management occupation, the salaries increased 6%. It was close. And if you look at the two different accumulated years, it did pretty well. But in 2023, CPI was 3.9, but salaries increased 5. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that what you're looking at is that wages don't correspond to CPI increases. That wages, as I said earlier, respond to talent scarcity, economic shifts, and competitive pressures, not CPI. Now, you'll see again in 2025 is even management occupation shows down 1.3%. Now, this may be a timing. Salary increases, these numbers, 2025, are numbers up to August 2025. So it may be some timing that something is going to happen in the end of the year. But it still gives you an idea if you're sitting there processing salary increases using CPI and cost of living, you may need to kind of scratch your head. Now, this is kind of a stand back and take a look at what's happened, is the compounding nature of the consumer price index. Price increase don't just add, they build on each other year after year, creating a much larger cumulative effect than a single period of inflation rate. For example, a modest 2% annual CPI increase, and 2% is modest, over 30 years doesn't lead to a 60% rise in price. It compounds to a total increase of 81%. So in real terms, something that costs $100 today would cost $181 dollars 3 decades later from now, even under relatively mild inflation. So what I did is I took the hourly rate in 2019 and increased it by CPI for each year, and then compared it to what we see in 2025. Okay. Building materials and retail suppliers, which I'm looking at as on a retail, were fairly close. Truckers, close. They're off a bit. But when you come to warehousing, they're off quite a bit. In warehousing, then people working in the warehouse should be making 2863 if it's solely based on CPI and compounded in the year, okay, that it happened, compared to current salaries of 2478. And if you look at the side of that, you would say, okay, in 2020, warehouse 2380 was the average hourly rate. Just with CPI, you would be looking at 2863. Now, also that CPI I used was all items. And most warehouse workers are kind of at the bottom of the supply chain. And the food and housing CPI would be much higher. So thinking about the compounding effect, take a look at your own salary scales and how they've moved. So if salary costs have increased, costs are up, that's no surprise. But why? In inflationary driven salary escalation, across the board increases tied to CPI or union agreements compound annually, regardless of performance. So ineffective performance management without rigorous reviews, underperformers remained entrenched and overpaid. High performers feel undervalued and leave, creating a brain drain and a skills vacuum. Reactive cost controls, like going through a buyout, these measures often target tenure rather than value. And in fact, they often target high performers, not recent hires who have not been evaluated or are underperforming. Results are loss of institutional knowledge, retention of lower quality performers, and stagnation in tech adoption. Hiring freeze, wholesale hiring freeze may offer short-term cost relief, but they often come out at the expense of long-term capacity and competitiveness. New ideas also often come from new people. Freezes can stall R&D, digital transformation, and process improvements. I ran into this. I was in banking for 30 years. And I remember when I was a senior manager with, I guess, 10, maybe 15 years experience. And I looked around and there were very few of us senior managers with the experience level. And it was easily traced back 5 years to when they had a hiring freeze and a buyout. And they lost a whole chunk of people at that time in middle management with experience. They just weren't there anymore. And performance suffered. One of the other parts is if you've outsourced some of your processes or is you've actually also outsourced other costs that are linked to wages. has your supplier increased his fees by CPI? If he's increased them by less than CPI, maybe he's doing a good job. If he's relying on CPI to increase his costs every year to you, you may want to wonder about that. And talking again about my experience 10 or 15 years ago, climbing the professional ladder meant proving your value through performance reviews, earning promotion, and building a track record of results. Compensation was a reflection of contribution, not just a reaction to rising prices. Okay. And the point I'm pushing on, after everything that's happened since 2019, 2020, it rebuild the performance review system, shift from tenure or availability to value-based compensation, decouple inflation from salaries for underperformers. CPI-linked increases should be conditional, not automatic. You're going to get a big fight from some people and just try and wonder why they're fighting it. Target talent renewal, not blanket buyouts. Instead of broad buyouts, use performance-based exits. And that's when pair this with strategic hiring in future critical roles. I always sat down and I evaluated my managers on their ability on performance-based exits. If you rank this person, you do a valid performance review and the person is low, then I would say to them, you've got 6 months to bring up I'd say to their manager, you've got 6 months to bring up their performance or they exit. And this is going to be the hardest job you ever had in management. And I believe that is performance-based exits is the hardest job there is for a manager. And again, reiterating, if you're outsourcing processes, you also outsource the employee costs and performance. How well are your suppliers doing managing this? If they're doing a good job, increases should be less than CPI. Wouldn't that be an interesting discussion when your supplier comes with a salary increase and let's discuss how well you're managing your costs and your employee costs. Be a very interesting discussion. So kind of recapping on that, exchange rates, and maybe a long-winded piece that exchange rates, tariffs, economic downturns present opportunities, but there are challenges there. Don't assume everything works the way it does back here in Canada. And that problems with one country can overflow to their neighbor. You may say, I don't deal with these guys, I deal with so-and-so. I don't deal with Vietnam, I deal with Malaysia. They're very close. All right. And this will affect global markets for related commodities and products. And it's kind of a way is to keep a look. You may not want to deal with this company in this country, but this is going to affect who you are dealing with on a global basis. And when it comes down to wages, and it's not just wages, but controlling salary costs, so labor markets don't follow inflation charts. They respond to talent scarcity, economic shifts, and competitive pressures. As I just said, performance matters more than inflation. Increases should be conditional on performance. They should not be automatic. And when you look at one of the current problems going on, particularly with France, you kind of scratch your head and say, they're caught between a rock and a hard place. But hey, maybe it's time to buy wine. So anyway, those are the two key pieces I put into the report, and they're there to hopefully help people think about what is going on, and some areas you may not have thought about. It's funny, with increasing wages and so forth, it's so easy to forget about performance when you can't hire anybody at a reasonable rate. Don't lose the good performers, and keep performance a key to your salary increases. Anyway, that's what I have for this Friday morning while people are thinking about Halloween and so forth. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Bob, John, just curious as a former banker, what your thoughts are on basically the Western world, so the US, Canada, Europe countries, Australia, New Zealand, all ramping up their debt load. Everybody hasn't lost their marbles, I don't believe. So it seems purposeful to me that we're spending way more than we're bringing in. I mean, even the US is having trouble selling its treasuries. So that is a big problem. And as you mentioned, as we all print more money and raise debt levels, the inevitable result is higher inflation, weaker dollar. And in terms of the internal consumer, so where we all play with our Canadian consumer and buying our products, it makes our products more expensive. They're racking up massive amounts of debt. And in addition, in the office products industry, you have a group of products that are nearing the end of their life cycle because of obsolescence, a shift in consumer work habits, more technology, less paper, et cetera, et cetera. But what do you think of the direction in particular of the US with they're adding $1 trillion of debt every 75 days. And that is massive.
Yeah.
So, and then you've got the BRICS nations who seem to be interested in buying gold, and you've seen what gold and silver has been doing. So far it's been governments and banks flocking to gold and silver, but as soon as the consumer figures it out and they start buying it, it's going to be interesting. So it seems that everybody's identifying a weakness in fiat currency. So why do you think, and what do you think the result of Western nations racking up record amounts of debt?
I think it's why they're racking it up. I was in lending and around the world, and I was an auditor for 7 years traveling around the world. And it's really what you're spending it on. You look at France, and you see that France and Canada certainly previously wasn't immune to this. Is they're spending money and racking up debt on recurring expenses. When you look at France, the way they pay out pensions and the amount they pay, France pensions, they don't even have a pension fund. They take in contributions this year and pay it out this year. There's nothing left. There's nothing invested. There is a small piece, but it doesn't work. So if you're doing that, now if you're investing on things like infrastructure and so forth, there's a payback. There's That's an investment. And I think you have to look at countries in that way is, are they investing in the future or are they just buying votes? Okay. And we did it here in Canada for years. Hopefully we've learned some of that lesson. Okay. And we'll invest.
But we've got a financial guy who's racking up more debt than Trudeau did here. Like, I don't get it. He ran on the idea of better, management of funds and is not doing it. So it seems purposeful. He's not an idiot. He's supposed to know how money works, but he's doing it. So
Well,
I mean,
yeah. And those
right?
are legacy pieces that will, yeah, it's politically, it's hard to turn off the tap. Again, like I said, in France, they can't even get a budget passed. Um,
Well, the Canadian budget for deficit was 42 billion, and he's looking like he's going to come in at 80. So that's not only
yeah,
not turning off the tap, but that's doubling what the previous, we'll call him a manager just for fun, the previous manager was doing, racking up 42 billion, and now this guy's going to double it. Like, I don't
yeah.
get it. I'm lost.
Well, when the budget comes out, which is very soon, take a look at how much is being actually becomes investment and how much is uh, just historical and political. Hopefully the political side will start reducing and the investments will go up, which hopefully will have a payout in the future. But these things don't happen overnight. The thing I wonder about on the US side is it seems that they're totally don't care about exports at all. Okay. Now they have positive balance of trade and services, but how many countries are going to start turning that off? Or even the high tech or the research people start moving to other countries because they don't want to live in Canada. So you wonder, is US, they may make their Jeeps in the US, but they're not exporting anymore, right? And they really aren't competitive uh, in productivity or anything in that sector. And the future kind of scratches your head. Um, they want to make their own aluminum, but they don't have power facilities to do that. So where's the real investment? I don't know. Um, I don't disagree with you on a lot of pieces coming out. Let's look at the budget, but understand that's going to take some years. It's politically, it's hard, though he's supposedly a liberal. I had one person say, "Well, finally we've got a conservative prime minister," but uh, it takes time. Politically, it's really hard in a democracy to kind of turn that off, as France is seeing.
Yeah, well, it is a challenge now that we've done what we've done for 10 years. And, you go back to a meritocracy and performance-driven compensation. I've always believed in exactly what you said and continue to do that. Not just tie things to inflation, but that isn't the way the government works. And it's not the example that they've set. They've hired 10,000 employees and we've gotten nothing for that in terms of better service for Canadians. It's just been a complete, drain on our finances. And yeah, it's hard to find, some light at the end of the tunnel right now with, and not just here,
Yeah.
but the U.S. and other Western nations, right? It's like they've all gone into self-destruct mode, and it seems to be based around the currency. You know, I almost think that they're hell bent on CBDCs and they want to collapse paper currency. And then they'll offer you 50 cents on the dollar to convert. So currency drops like the Zimbabwe dollar did down to pennies on the dollar. And then the government will come in and go, hey, yeah, your dollar now is only worth 10 cents versus a dollar. And but we'll give you 60 cents or 70 cents on the dollar in CBDC currency to replace it in your bank account. You know, that it almost feels like that's the move that they're all trying to make. I don't know. It's perplexing, but again, boiling it back to the Canadian consumer, and the CPI index, for example, I mean, they slice and dice that thing and remove things from it so the inflation doesn't look as bad as what you and I actually feel in the market when we have to put gas in our car, but also buy, you know, your groceries, your milk and your bread and your durables. It's your office supplies. So it's, I think it's worse out there than some of the government reports show. It's like in Carney's budget. He's going to try and separate it. And, you know, at the end of the day, money is money. We have it or we don't. We're printing it or we're not. It doesn't matter where he's spending it, right? It's, do we have it? You wouldn't run your
no, it
household like they
does.
run it.
Yeah. No, it does matter where you're spending it. But
Certainly
anyway,
it does, but the problem is, I mean, just look at the Canadian Taxpayer Federation, right? If you look at where they spend our money, it's disgusting where they spend it and what they spend it on. And there's a ton of waste there that could be eliminated so that we can, the balance remaining is spent on good projects, right?
well, as I said at the start, I missed your comments, John. But I think what Michael's waving at is we've run out of time for today.
Yes. We're bumping it. So I'm
Yeah.
glad you're happy I'm back to be a royal pain in the butt. So that's good.
Hey,
We'll see you next month, but just a quick question, Bob. That data that was reported on, you've including those charts on wages and salaries, does that include like bonuses or is it strictly what their wages are or their actually salaries are?
well, it's an average. So what the problem becomes when I was looking particularly at management is when you sit down and do the average over the year, of course, December 31st, and depending if they push it over to January, depends where those bonuses are paid.
Okay, so they're somehow they should be factored in that.
Yeah, and you probably see where you have on management 1.3% lower. When we finally get December's numbers, they will be averaged.
Right. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining the call. And
I hope your team wins tonight, Michael.
yes, either one.
One
Either
of them
one.
has to win.
Exactly. He's
I hope
in
so.
a no-lose situation, that guy.
Yeah, I bet all my money on both teams. So I'm
Exactly. Way to go.
All right,
guys.
take care, everyone, and
Yeah.
we'll talk next month, hopefully.
Yep. Have a good one.
Yeah.
Hey,
Bye now.
cheers.